Welcome to the Locals Only Lounge. I'm your host, Andrew Dyer. We have a special lounge tonight. As you had heard from the previous show, we are a couple minutes behind, but we're glad if you stuck around. And if you didn't, that you are listening to this maybe tomorrow on your preferred podcast app. But since we are a little behind, let's not waste any more time. Producer John Cross is with us. John, good to see you again.
Yes, right back at it. So excited for our guest tonight.
And our guest, journalist and researcher James Stout. James,
Hi, thanks for
thank
having
you,
me.
thank you so much for coming on with us.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to have a chat.
So I guess for people who maybe aren't familiar with your work and what you do, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yep, certainly. So I'm a journalist now. I work for iHeartMedia, which people might be familiar with, but I do a news podcast for them. Um, in a previous life, I was an academic, and I wrote about sport and anti-fascism in 1930s Catalonia specifically. But obviously, in the course of my PhD, studied kind of sport and specifically like popular fan culture and physical culture in a broader basis. It's a modern European history degree, so mostly looking at Europe, not so much at the United States. But yeah, that's my academic background. I'm still very interested in I'm very interested in how we can use sport to build more inclusive communities. I think that's one of the great values of sports as we don't talk about, and I think it's very interesting like looking at the context I come from. Like, my family have been Carlisle supporters since I don't know, before written history. I don't, but the club's only like 100 and something years old, so not that long, but a long time, and sort of that club's obviously very rooted in the community. That's not so much like the case with football in America, but I think it's really interesting the ways it's postured itself in a very progressive fashion.
So, what is your relationship with football? You mentioned your family is Carlisle supporters. What is your history with the game, and you grew up with it, and how is that?
Yeah, so my mum's side is not, they're from Liverpool, so they're Liverpool through and through, right? Like I've been to Anfield with my gran and my granddad, and then going to Brunton Park, which is the Carlisle Stadium, slightly less famous than Anfield, I suppose. But going with my dad since I was really little, like standing football, like it's this is we're not talking about Premier League football here. It's like have a pie and some bovril and standing, and lots of my best early memories with my dad are going to football, doing stuff outside as well. But like ever since I sort of maybe I don't know old enough to stand up for 90 minutes. I suppose we'd go whenever my side of the family had moved away from Carlisle, but then when we were back, if there was a home game, we go. My dad's a season ticket holder now, so I've been, when I go back, I'll still go. But it's something that like I don't know. It's a nice way of feeling like you're at home. I think for me now, but it's always been every time they go to Wembley, we'd go and that kind of thing. Like even when we were down south or whenever we went up north, or if they played near us, we'd go up watch them there.
So, what's your well, I'm not sure how long you've been in the States, but what's your relationship with football in the States been like?
I I sort of tried when I first came here, like in a sort of effort. I came here in 2008, so like just at the end of the Bush presidency, like August of 2008. I when I first came here, I kind of looked it up, and like it didn't very much feel the same for me. Like honestly, like I think I wasn't watching football to watch people kick a ball around. I was watching football because it was something that I enjoyed doing with my dad, and I liked the singing and being part of a thing that's bigger than yourself and being part of your community. I spent some time in between 2008 and now living in Barcelona doing my PhD research. So I would go to Barcelona games. That was always something I really enjoyed. One of the guys I live with, he wrote the match summary on the Barcelona website, if I remember correctly, which meant that he could get us cheap tickets. So like that was great. We'd go and watch that.
Oh, I think we lost. Did I lose him or did we both lose him, John?
Yeah, James, we have lost your audio.
If you want to type in the chat, let him know.
So go ahead, Andrew. I'll let you talk for a second. I'm going to type to James here.
Okay. So while we get that resolved, well, we can talk a little bit about the survey again if you want to hear more of my opinions about where the supporter group should go. I'm happy to ramble on about that.
You can go ahead. We're going to try to work out James's audio situation here while you're going.
Okay. Well, this is the joy of live streaming, where we get to deal with issues as they come. So yeah, with the survey results, John, you mentioned that you were a little bit surprised by a few things in there. Otherwise, was it pretty much what you expected to see?
I would say the survey results were pretty much what I expected overall, but still I was surprised with how many people were, I guess, open to exploring ideas and wanting to keep the group together, right? That the group has become like their family. It's kind of like what James was saying just before I left, that community aspect. We really have developed that within our supporter group, and people don't want to lose that now that the team is gone. So trying to figure out where we might be going next.
Yeah.
So
you want to try to bring him back on?
I was going to say we do have James. We're going to try to bring him back on here and see if we got audio going this time.
I was about to really get on a roll with my.
Yeah, hopefully this works this time. Sorry.
Oh, you sound good.
Yeah,
we're glad to have you back.
Yeah, this is my literal job. In case what I'm doing.
It always happens right whenever you really don't need it to.
Yeah, exactly. But no, hopefully you caught much of that. I did go to the Marshall Islands this year, which is the only country on earth that doesn't have a football team.
Oh wow!
They just started one actually. I bought one of the shirts the other day.
What were you doing in the Marshall Islands?
It's a place that we, when I say we, I mean America, has nuked, unfortunately, quite a lot. And unfortunately, it's also one of the places which is at very high risk of disappearing due to climate change. So I made a documentary podcast for iHeart. Really beautiful place. I would suggest people go if they want to see that before things get much worse with climate change. You can play football there. Play lots of football with children. I think I play most of my football when I'm on work. I was just in Syria for work, and there is not a place on earth where little children haven't got like 2 jumpers and something to kick around, and they want to play football. So I've been owned by various 8-year-olds all around the world playing football.
So I want to ask kind of the reason we wanted to bring you on was that so the locals as a supporter group began, I think, in 2019 is the official start time.
Yes.
A lot of the original members kind of came from American Outlaws, which is like the U.S. national team supporters.
Yeah.
But there was an effort, I think, from the beginning where people wanted this supporter group to kind of have a little bit more of a European flavor, and then we took on, of course, Latin American flavor as well.
Yeah.
As things went on, where the supporter group does sing through the whole match. There's no break. It never stops. It's whistle to whistle. No matter what the score is, it never stops. And that's not something that I've noticed in other, well, at least not in the second division in the USL. Maybe in MLS it's like that in some places, but And one thing that we've kind of encountered was, last year the club signed this guy, Andrew Carlton, who had been at January 6th, and it caused a lot of strife among people in the supporter group. There's been, in the stadium, we have a Black Lives Matter banner. That was controversial for a member. And one of the things that I kind of thought was like, I don't know if everybody understands, like, what a, like, how, like, this is all normal, like, supporter group stuff in my mind, right? But I don't know if everybody kind of is aware of, especially in the States, of where this part of supporter culture comes from. So I'm going to ask you, where, how, and why did soccer fans get so political?
Yeah, it's a good question. If I can be just really pretentious and like reference a sociology book, there's a book by Elias and Dunning, which I think is really worth reading, where they talk about like there's this idea that like the stadium is a place for controlled working class exuberance. It's where you can go and be expressing yourself, right? You can sing. Every time I take an American to a game at Carlisle, like they've heard words which you certainly wouldn't hear said in public, let alone sung by like 10,000 people. But that's part of what we do. But a lot of it is it's a place where the exuberance was allowed, was tolerated, right? Like you're. These days, I would say this is not true. But if we look at like the early 20th century, you're less likely to get cracked on the skull by a cop for saying something in a football stadium than you might be somewhere else. If we look like even earlier than that, right, like in the division between players and spectators, so when football, like that's how it gets the name soccer, right? It's association football, and that comes from the codification of the rules. And when the rules were codified, they were done in such a way that it was designed to exclude what was called professional players, right? There was a distinction between like gentlemen and players, and like the idea being that gentlemen wouldn't take a wage. What that was designed to exclude working class people from the sport, right? Like that's why it was happened. It's very clear. It's very in the Football Association's foundation. It's very explicit that that's why it was done. There was a Netflix program that people might have watched a couple of years ago, which might have given them a window into this a little bit, like these factory teams, which is where a lot of teams come from, right? Especially in the north of England, right? Factories, mines, like these dockyards, these kind of things. And the idea was to exclude working people because it wasn't they didn't want sport to be a social mixing ground, right? And so a lot of working people were excluded and sort of relegated to the terraces. And it was there that people were able to express their identity, and it was a place where it was safe for them to express their identity, both politically and culturally. And that's continued throughout certainly European football, also Latin American football, right? Like it's a place where, if we look at FC Barcelona, for instance, the fans own the club, right? The socios, I don't know what the socios, like the subscribers to the club, I don't know, the members. It's a place where like the community can represent itself and not be portrayed in a way other than the way it wants to portray itself, right? And these clubs have taken on like political stances across the spectrum. To be clear, like not all football is anti-fascist. In fact, some of it's explicitly fascist, right? But another great book that people might want to read if they're interested in like the more modern political fan culture is 1312 by James Montague. I don't know if you've read that. No,
I haven't.
Okay, it's good. It comes from, of course, 1312, like all cops are bastards, which is kind of the great unifying principle of all football ultras across left and right, right? Like no one likes police, and so that like it's the one thing you'll see written in the toilet of every football stadium, like regardless of which way the fans are leaning. And he writes about, like, for instance, I'm sure you're familiar with the role that football fans played in Tahrir Square in Egypt in an Arab Spring. Of course, the role that football fans played in the Euromaidan in Ukraine, and the role that like organized groups of football ultras still play on the front lines in Ukraine, right? So like these very political groups, but also these like networks between fans, which was always something really interesting to me growing up. Like my like sporting backgrounds were in cycling. I was a bike racer. That was my job for a while. my first coach when I started cycling was a Sheffield United hooligan, like by his own admission. Like he had like Sheffield United SUFC, like but like a sort of rustic tattoo that he'd done himself, and the blades and all that. And anywhere you go in Europe to race bikes, he's got friends because it's different football clubs, and they're networked together, and we could stay with them. And so like football went from being like a thing that people did, and I guess to go back even further, before that, right, you had football, like folk football, played between two villages, and like you had a ball, and you play it on a holiday, like a day when everyone was off work, and then you kick the ball into the other village, and that was how you scored. And one of the reasons that it went from like a game to a sport, or from play to sport, is when we had rules and we had pitches. And the reason we started adding rules is because people kept killing each other, right? There was a lot of stabbing and such happening, so they had to bring it within like a delineated space, which is when we get a pitch. When we get a pitch, someone controls the pitch, and then when they control the pitch, they control the rules. And very quickly, they use that to exclude people of a certain class, right, who they think it's undesirable to play with. And so those people move to a terrace. To come back to original question, the terrace is where they can represent their community, right? It's football didn't used to be super expensive. It is now. Like the Premier League is extremely expensive now, even down in the League One where Carlisle play. It's expensive, but it's an expensive that at least in League One people could pay. My dad had a season ticket, and so it was a place where working class people could gather. It was also like a public space in a way that like a third space. It's neither home nor work. So it was a place where people could express themselves in a way that there weren't that much. There's a pub is the other big one in English society, of course, right? But British society. But those were really two public spaces in a rapidly urbanizing society in the early 20th, late 19th century that didn't have a lot of public spaces for working class people, right? They're not welcome. When Habermas writes about the public sphere, he talks about the coffee house. Fucking coal miners aren't going to the coffee house, right? That's not for them. So you got the pub and you got football, and so it becomes a place where people can express all aspects of their identity, not just we're winning, we're losing, we scored a goal, whatever.
So whenever and I don't know how familiar you are with football in the US,
Yeah.
but when we talk about clubs like Liverpool and these clubs that come out of the docks and the mines and factories, and you kind of have this long multi-generational tradition from those working class roots, from the pitch to the stands. And then in the States, we have this very, very American kind of superficial version of that, where we try to take all of these generational traditions and create them out of thin air, right? Have you?
Yeah.
What is your take on the American pyramid, such that it exists, and MLS in our first division?
Yeah, sometimes I like to say the only place I feel that my culture is being appropriated as an English person is when I watch Americans watching football. Like, in a sense, it is. I think it's funny how American fan culture seeks to replicate European fan culture when we have such a rich and vibrant fan culture just to the south of us, right? All across Latin America. Some of the most insane fan cultures in the world can be found across South and Central America. Like incredibly dedicated and incredibly entrenched fan cultures, and I see that coming more now, I think. But there's like a conscious effort to replicate, specifically, I think, British again, like this is a bit of a trope and it's not always true, but like people will watch like Green Street Hooligans and try and make it their personality, even though it's not a very good film. But like there's a conscious effort to replicate that, and I think it's very hard to replicate that specific thing because the clubs, like as you've just experienced, right? They have something of an ephemeral existence. Like it would not be possible for Liverpool Football Club to cease existing. Like the city would burn, Like people would like there would be blood in the streets. Like it wouldn't happen. And it's not to say that fans here are any less dedicated, because I know it's been very difficult for a lot of people to lose something that they'd invested a lot of time and energy and love and passion into. But yeah, the extent to which clubs are entrenched in families and communities. Like my great grandmother, like I can remember like the songs, like them singing those songs, and like there are songs that you think of football matches that like you've heard from like the older members of your family before you were old enough to go to the football matches, even like, and like those are things that are very entrenched in my family, as well as in that fan culture, right? Because that's just being from that place. That's part of that. Even if you don't care about football, uh, those things are still entrenched in you. Like I think about like Hibs, right? They sing "Sunshine on Leaf." Like people have that at their wedding as their first song, or people have that. It's a song people have at a funeral. I think of course, if you're a big fan, that's important. But even if you're not, it's part of being from there, and it's not. That's not the same here. It's not really the same from what I've seen, the other big sports either, right? The people are very keen on the Chargers. It was very bizarre to me that a team could leave. I understood that like sort of intellectually, but to experience that was very strange. And it's not to say that the fans aren't any more dedicated. It's just different. The way the sport relates to the community is different, I think.
I think that's kind of one of the things that maybe misconceptions, at least in the early stages of San Diego Loyal and the locals, where people kind of think it's a fan club, like they're like Padres fans or Chargers fans, and part of the growth of the supporter group was kind of educating people like what it means to be a supporter, and it's like, well, we're going to spend time painting this giant tifo, and we're going to be
Yeah.
on our feet the whole match, and it's a totally different. It's unique, I think, in football compared to all the other sports. And I don't know. From my kind of opinion, is because American football is so corporate, right? And
Yeah.
I think we talk a lot about like Liverpool as a club and as a fan base, and
Mhm.
it's almost like an overtly political club, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of politics with the club associated with them and with the fans. But here you have these clubs who make it kind of a point to avoid controversy, right? That's not what we want to do. Um,
Mhm.
does it then kind of become more on the shoulders of the supporters to make sure that their values and community is reflected in these clubs that have the city's name attached to them?
Yeah. Like, are you familiar with FC St. Pauli in Germany? Yeah, so
Yes.
that fan culture comes out of squatter culture, right? And the Reeperbahn, and like the people who are coming to the clubs or explicit to the games are explicitly anti-fascist, because it was in the area that was squatted by people who were anti-fascist, right? And they're part of this autonomous. If people aren't familiar, FC St. Pauli is maybe the most explicitly anti-fascist football club, apart from like wearing the Clapham Community Football Club shirt. Which is modeled on the flag of the Spanish Second Republic, which is the thing I wrote my dissertation about. And they have like the 3 arrows, and it says "No Pasaran" on the back. So they might be challenging. And then it's got the International Brigades, a 3-pointed star as well, for the most anti-fascist football club. Bit of a smaller club though. But
Oh, that's good. I didn't even notice that you had had that on there.
yeah, it's the same as I've got this Spanish Second Republic flag over here. It's the same colours.
Oh, wow. That's
It's their
incredible.
away strip, but they've won it. They've had it for years. It's great. They've sold an insane number of shirts for a football club that like everybody just stands around the pitch. But they're great. They're worth a follow on Twitter. So Pauli are a very explicitly anti-fascist football club, right? Their slogan: "No fascists in football," or "Fans gegen Rex," fans against the right. And that is a culture that came from the ground up. It didn't come from the top down, right? And like the attempt to commercialize certainly like anti-fascist cultures, we saw it all over in 2020, where it's extremely cringe and extremely vapid, and it didn't work, and it didn't mean the same thing that it means. And like what happened in St. Pauli, I think, is an example that people can look at. Like, they weren't by any means they're still not a great football team, but like you've heard of them, that they're there because they stand for something, and I think that's made them popular. Like I bet a lot of people, it's not possible to go to a dive bar or a punk show in most places in the world and not see a Fansgegen Rex sticker, like somewhere, right? Like I've seen them. I saw a Fansgegen Rex sticker in the toilet of a bar in Kigali, which is the capital of Rwanda. It's everywhere. That culture supersedes any knowledge of the club, and it's great. And they do, as a club, really, like, it's not a superficial, it's not a brand. Like they will, for instance, organize five-a-side games for refugees. They've hired LGBTQIA players so that they can be playing for a club that supports them and affirms their identity. But yeah, that came from the ultras. It came from the fans being like, "This is who we are," and like making their stadium, I guess, not a safe place for fascists. Meant that their stadium was a safe place for people who wouldn't have felt safe around fascists, right? And that's true of a lot of fan cultures, I think. Like I don't think certain football clubs, in certain cases, they did, but I don't think certain cases, like in Barcelona, has always asserted a more progressive identity compared to Madrid, right? And then that really came up under Franco. But like even Jimmy Burns has written some excellent books about Spanish football history. If people are interested, he's a lovely guy.
So this is interesting because you brought up Madrid and
Yeah,
like my brother. This is off the point, but
yeah.
I was making a bunch of jokes during the summer that Christian Pulisic should sign with Barcelona, and my brother is like, "Oh, I'm a Real fan," and I'm like, "Oh, you're a fascist or what?" Like, how much
Yeah.
how much does these kind of political affiliations, like, how much in 2023 does that, like, does it reflect the fan base? Does the fan base reflect that? For like a global brand like Real Madrid, like I associate it with Franco because I like to be a pain in the ass to people. But is it still that way?
I think I mean, it's certainly not everyone, right? But and I come from a perspective which is entrenched in like living in Catalonia and talking about this chiefly in Catalan with Catalan people. But our perspective was that they were a fascist team and that Barcelona was there for it. Like, even, I don't know, if, I found a thread on Twitter the other day. It was like Barcelona players taking anti-fascist action. It's all just them like nutmegging Madrid players. It's from the women's team, but like it's certainly a very popular identity, and you'll see them giving it like the salute in the stadium, right? Like that still happens, and certainly outside the stadium too, right? Obviously, it's not to say that everyone who supports a team is a fascist, or certainly everyone who gets hired by the team. But even as recently as the last decades of the previous century before Franco died, Johan Cruyff, right, was with the Barcelona manager, and he called his son Jordi, which is a Catalan name. Catalan names were allowed under Franco, right? So like consciously or unconsciously, he chose to do a thing which was banned, and so in doing so raised a massive middle finger at Madrid, right? This is a Dutch guy who's not like he's certainly not Catalan, but he's been embraced by the Catalans, and something about that club has imbued in him that identity to want to, whether or not he knew. I mean, it would be, it's an interesting choice if you don't know, but yeah, that, for instance, he's a hero in Barcelona. I don't think he could buy himself a drink. So like, I think that still is reflected in fan culture. Certainly, some of the other identities, right? The faith-based ones that you'll see when there are two clubs in a city. In much of certainly in Britain, we'll see like a Catholic and a Protestant club, but those are still very real. Like you don't have to look much further than what's happening right now in Palestine, and like you can see how different clubs' fan bases have reacted, and even to their even when they're being like ejected from the stadium for doing so, right? Like they don't get to watch the football match, but they're doing so because that political identity is clearly important to them. In some cases, they know they're going to get booted out, and they're still doing it, right? That's a conscious choice. So I think it is still very real. If you look at the I was spent a lot of time talking last year. I was supposed to go to Ukraine, but I didn't. But if you look at how some of the explicitly anarchist and anti-fascist units in Ukraine are supplied, it's through football fans from the rest of Europe, right? Like I was speaking to some Polish people, they acquire cars from anti-fascist clubs in Italy. Someone drives them up through, through Europe, come up to Poland. Poland anti-fascist fans, people from an anti-fascist group will outfit those vehicles, take them into Ukraine, where, as we know, right, they're anti-fascist football fan groups, ultras, fighting on the front line as units in the war. So like that's a very real identity. It's one that people are killing and dying for. It doesn't mean there aren't also fascist football fans fighting on the front lines, because there are in groups, but it's still a very real identity. Like it doesn't get much more real than that, you know.
Have you seen, and I don't know your exposure to, supporter culture in the US, but is there anything close to that here with some of our supporter groups? Have you seen, fan bases that you affiliate with any of these movements, or things here as sterile as maybe they seem?
I don't think they're as sterile, but I think my perception is that they become more so as the game becomes more corporate, right? So like I think like you had a BLM banner in the stadium, but also the club reflected that progressive identity. So the actions they took, like when they were getting like homophobic slander, right? They clearly had at least the players had taken that on board. The bigger it gets, right? Like with for instance, the new San Diego FC, like I'm reminded of that. There's a concept in sports history called placelessness, which is widely like panned as ridiculous. It's written by a guy called Bale. He's a sports geographer. Seems like he watched one Olympic track and field thing and then just wrote a book about it, like saying that what matters is the record performance, and that's why all the stadiums are the same in athletics, and what matters is running the 100 meters the fastest, not where and not who. That's widely accepted to have never applied to football, right? Like it just doesn't. Like playing a game. That's why we have home and away games. You know, it is why we have stands. It's why we sometimes don't let people go in the stands. But that concept of placelessness seems to apply when sport becomes a vehicle for investment, and like you see, like we'll put an MLS team here because we can get sponsors and bring revenue and blah blah blah. Like it that makes it harder for people like yourselves, right? Like genuine fans who want to assert like a like wherever it's ultras or like a fan club or whatever you want to call it. Pena. It makes it harder, right? Because there's not that sense of permanence, and it's not like intergenerational in the same way. You see it a little bit with like East Coast in sports, right? Like with like Boston and New York and places like that, right? Like that was always the place that sort of you'd look for it, but it's maybe that's similar, but then it's just a team identity, right? There's not like an ultras group within that. You know, they're not doing tifos, they're not doing pyros, they're not asserting as much of a political identity. If you compare that to like Barcelona in 2018, when Catalonia had the independence referendum, like Barcelona was out there making statements, being like, "No, we're in favor of this. Come to the stadium to vote." Right, and the Spanish government had declared the vote illegal, so they had sent in police. It's the equivalent of the like California voting to secede, and Joe Biden sending in the U.S. Marshals to try and stop us, right? And you know the San Diego Loyal or San Diego FC were being like, come to the stadium and have your independence vote, and we won't let the cops in. Like, you perhaps wouldn't see that from an American club in the same way. It doesn't mean it can't happen. It doesn't mean that like it's not possible for fans to make clubs like welcoming and like progressive places. But it takes some more doing when the club isn't as rooted, I think.
So this interview kind of came about because I think you and I were both kind of having some fun with this SDFC logo on Twitter, and I thought it was a great opportunity for me to finally invite you onto the pod so we could have this conversation. I want to know what your take is on, like, so our supporter group, Support the Loyal,
Yeah.
it's rooted in some of these kind of progressive values, and this that the team stood for something that really galvanized, a, I mean, even though the club was very young, you don't have that generational thing because they took that stand in 2020. It really, it really had an effect on fans, and it really kind of gave people that feeling, that attachment. And we've built this community around the supporter group.
Yeah.
We no longer have a club. So, there's a very good chance that in order to keep our community together, we have to go and support the club that essentially killed ours. Um, is there, I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? This logo that they came out with on their shield. What does that say to you, and how, you know what do you think about the supporter group? What should we do?
I like look, the logo was cringe and the explanation of it was worse, right? Like I refuse to believe they're human, right? That they're like both powerful, both strong thing, or like both
It's
epic.
the flow. It's the flow. Come on.
Yeah, the Azul and like yeah, it was very Chat GPT. Yeah, and it was bad. Like and it just stank of like corporate like it kind of make something that's acceptable to everyone. But that doesn't mean that like yeah, like I mean, look, my dad goes to the football every Saturday, and like it would be bad if obviously not every Saturday in the summertime, but when it's on, and his friends all sit next to each other, and like I would be sad if that got taken away from him, and so would he. And like I would rather that he go or like this, and it's the same for you guys, I assume, right? You have a community that you've built a set of values. You have people who share those values, who will show up, who will show up for the same causes that you will, and that you share something that you enjoy. So, like in that sense, maybe there's an opening to make this club something that reflects that. Like if people turn up and they reflect that, and like I think some of it does come down to being like there is no space for racism in our stadium. There's no space for homophobia in our stadium, and the way you assert that is very different in America to the way we might do that in Europe because you all have guns, and so it makes it harder to just and but the way that happened, the way those clubs came in Europe isn't necessarily from like someone making a corporate DEI decision. It's from someone, if it can be crude, like punching someone who said something racist, right? Even like I've got a friend who I talk to a lot about football, and we were talking about Eric Cantona the other day, and like how like Eric Cantona kicked a guy for being a bigot, right? And like Manchester United was always one of those clubs that didn't feel like it had, at least at that time, as much. Like it was obviously very rooted, but lots of the people I knew from Manchester supported City, right? And it became a global mega club that people and like the problem with Manchester United wasn't that Eric Cantona kicked the guy, so no one else kicked him first, or that like 10 other people who were on his team didn't also kick the guy, right? Like, and then it became a spectacle. But like, there's a chance, I think, if you have a stadium and you have people who show up in it to be like, this is our stadium and this is how we run things, and like we get up and sing and like we do our tifos, and then you can't like send it as hard with the pyros as you can in some stadiums, but like to be like this is our place and this is how we run it, and the ultimately like if there's one thing we've seen in Europe, right, it's the people who own a club only have so much say in what happens on the stands of that club, right? There are, especially with the sort of global era of the mega club and the billionaire owner and such, right? Like, I don't think those people, get to decide what people are singing, chanting, doing in the stadium. And so, like, I think that's the same here. Like, it's especially with a new club where people might not be so inclined to show up. Like, there's a chance for people who do to a certain identity. And then, if the people who do own the club decide to push back on that identity, then that's a difficult situation. But cross that bridge when you come to it, I suppose.
So, what about you personally? Are you interested in coming out and watching this team? Did you ever come out and see Loyal? Does American football do anything for you at all?
I didn't. I kept intending to go and watch Loyal. Even made plans with my friends to do it like dozens of times, and they never did. That's just because I'm terrible at committing to stuff. It's so much easier once you like have that group of friends, and that's what you do on a Saturday. So yeah, I'd give it a crack again. Like it's just like especially with like the new stadium that we have, like it just feels so different to me. But it doesn't mean that like I shouldn't try it, right? Like I loved going to Barcelona, and I felt welcome there, and like every time I went there, I felt like I was doing a thing and part of a thing that was important. And so like I maybe the thing will feel the same. Certainly, like if the club begins to assert an identity that I can get behind, and if tickets aren't insanely expensive, then that would be something I would like to do. I know I stay in touch with some of the fan groups from LA, and I think they've asserted a really cool identity and a cool like progressive fan base there. I think they've been booted out of the stadium as well, actually, for having Palestine flags in recent weeks. But like that's something I've always wanted to do, to go up there.
And get kicked out? You want to go up there and get kicked out?
Yeah. I can think of 10 different ways to get kicked out of a match in LA. Yeah. I just wear my San Diego stuff.
Well, that's really insightful, and we really appreciate your perspective on it. And I hope that like our members, as they are either watching the stream or listen to the podcast later on, that they can really take something away from it. Certainly, I've learned a lot talking with you. I feel like I can just keep asking you these questions, but I guess before we wrap up, what is your like right now? Like, what's your favorite team to watch? What fan culture really like speaks to you like right now with what's going on in the world?
I've really enjoyed the way, like, of course, Glasgow Celtic have responded. I thought that was like, I don't know, it. I was talking to a colleague, and I've worked with Palestinian journalists before. I've written about Palestine before. I wrote a piece about parkour in Palestine pretty recently, before all this, and like, it's been really difficult. Like I was in Syria when all this began, and that was its own kind of difficult. And then come home, and like I sent the video of them singing "You'll Never Walk Alone" to my friend who's still there, and he was like, "Oh, this is really special for us." And like, that's a thing that only football could do. Like you're just not gonna get like thousands of people singing a song anywhere else. I think regardless of me, obviously people have very, very, I've been on the internet and I've seen that people have very divided opinions on this topic. But like, I think there's something we can all take from that. Like when your children, you're in a place where children are dying, and then bombs are falling and shit, and you're like, oh, well, these people in Scotland are singing a song for us, and that's nice. I think that's illustrative of like the power of fan culture in football, and I think that's really special, and it's something that like I've appreciated for a long time about football, but seeing it happen now, I'm constantly impressed by the ability of fans to like transcend borders and boundaries, and like reach out to people as people, and then come. That's another thing about football, right? Like it really doesn't matter. There are boxes and shit like you have to be very pretentious and wealthy to go to them, right? But like it doesn't matter. I remember watching Carlisle play at Wembley and watching Carlisle score, and like I've got no idea who the person next to me was, and I was 3 rows down by the time I fucking gathered myself, like, and I was probably 12 years old. It just doesn't matter, right? You're going to hug that person, they're going to hug you, your car key's going to fall out when you jump in the air, someone's going to find them later. Like it's just a very special sense of joy and belonging. So like that's always been something that I look for. That like that's what I go to football for. Since people watch that show about Wrexham, and they can have a grasp of it now. But like that is,
I sincerely, and this is not. I mean, it's a little bit of a bit, but I actually truly believe that maybe that show could be the domino that gets us pro rel in the U.S.
Yeah.
Like maybe in 100 years of this, maybe we'll finally have something like that system where a community club can actually, with of course financial investment, can actually
Yeah. Well,
go up
those
the
people.
ladder.
Yeah. I mean, to get like to get an actual promotion sort of setup would be. It's just it's very that blew my mind when I came here and watched American football and was like, what? Like you don't get promoted already? What the fuck's the point? Like, but I think like I think you can understand that people supported that club for years when they were shit and they were they'd lost all the time and like there's something very special to me about like you come from a town where the money has left, everyone with money has left, right? And it rains all the time and it's grey and there's nothing to do and there are no jobs and like the best part of your week is going to the football. Like that is something that football gives that not many other things do. Like there are other things that like individual people have, their hobbies and things, but like that chance to be happy, to be like ecstatically happy in a way that like you don't really get in the rest of your life. Like you don't really get that sheer elation that you get watching a football game with your friends, your family. Like that's what it gives to people. It gives them an escape and a way out and something to hope for. And like that's something that's really special about it. And I hope we have that here because like God knows we need it. Like our politics is terrible, and the economy is difficult for people at the minute, and then housing prices are insane. So like if we could all go to football, have a nice time, and even if we win or lose, like enjoy it together. It's something that brings communities together, I think. So like that's the thing I take from fan culture. But yeah, I've been just in the last few weeks watching the response to what's happening in Gaza and in Israel. Like I think initially, of course, with the initial terrible things that happened on 7th of October, I saw lots of fans expressing condolences and to other fans in Israel too. And I think that's a really powerful thing that football can do. And like you don't really get in other sports, at least to my knowledge. Like I enjoy watching rugby. I've participated in professional cycling. Like it's not the same. Really, it's not like even though the Tour de France is the most watched live event on earth, like and people will do political things. It's not the same as having those people confined in a stadium, doing things like a tifo. Like it's very hard to get 1,000 people to turn little pieces of card over in any other aspect of life, right? Like it's an incredible act of unity that you don't see anywhere else. So like, yeah, I guess that's what I take from it.
John, I know I've been kind of monopolizing our conversation with James. Do you have any questions or anything that you'd like to add?
I don't have any, and I know this was your guest, and I was just letting you roll with it tonight. I've enjoyed the conversation tremendously. A lot of the things, James, you said, my dad is English, and
Okay.
he grew up
My apologies.
outside of Bradford, and was a Bradford City
Yeah.
fan as well. And when we would go back and visit, but his big thing that he liked more was cricket. So, but I
That's a
remember
different fan culture.
right. But we'd go to the local club and just get fish and chips and sit out there and watch because he just wanted to be again back in the community and part of that community. And I think that those are some of the stories I've been enjoying hearing you talk about because I feel like we got a taste and a sense of that in our 4 years of building a strong community, and that's where we're at a crossroads right now. Is we don't want to lose what we built up, and just trying to figure out where we go next. But
yeah, that's an unenviable position, I'm afraid.
Yeah, you mentioned the Hibs. My grand is from Edinburgh, and that was I didn't even know that was her club until like a few years ago. So I haven't quite gotten into the Scottish Premier League quite just yet, but I feel like some kind of like a genealogical obligation to at least know something about the club.
You have to pick a song. You could do Sunshine on Leith. You have to teach people Sunshine on Leith first, but yeah, you could. you could bring that to San Diego.
So before we get off, and I know we're pushing an hour right now, but you mentioned just getting back from Syria. Can you tell us anything about your work over in Syria? What you're working on?
Yeah, for sure. So I was there meeting with some people from the Kurdish freedom movement. So people might be familiar with the YPG, the men's and women's forces, People's Protection Forces, respectively, who were the people who did the ground fighting against the territorial caliphate of the so-called Islamic State, right? Since that happened, they've carved out a large autonomous niche in north and east Syria, which they run according to principles of democratic confederalism, which is a libertarian communist ideology. So we can call it within the broader spectrum of anarchism, right? People don't elect representatives; they vote on things rather than picking people. People in San Diego can maybe identify why voting for people is a bad idea if they've been watching them there. But what I'm writing about specifically is like anarchists in the broad spectrum, how anarchists meet with war. So I was in Myanmar, it's called Burma sometimes, last year, meet with people, and I've stayed in touch with them and speak with them pretty often about how they've been fighting for democracy there, about how Kurdish and allied people, most of the Syrian democratic forces, which includes the YPG, are Arab actually, but started out with Kurdish movements, how they organize and how they've been fighting. And then I traveled across Kurdistan to eastern Kurdistan to meet with some people who were part of the leadership of that Kurdish freedom movement. And I'll be writing a book for AK Press about that and about the Spanish Civil War, kind of bringing in those three examples. Wanted to go to Ukraine and write about that as well, but I don't think that's going to happen in the next short while. So probably be those three examples. And yeah, I'm working on that book. Maybe I'll do a podcast about it at iHeartMedia. But incidentally, if another thing I've been working on, which might be interesting to people, is I do a lot of border reporting. Go down to the border, and I've been going a lot out to Humbo, where people might be aware that the border patrol are keeping people in open air detention for several days in pretty rough conditions. But the one thing that you can always talk to people about is football, right? Like I was sitting there the other day, and like it was terrible. It was raining. There was no shelter. People were shivering. We didn't have any hot food to give them. It was very sad. And then this guy just shows up in a QPR shirt, which was like not a reference I'd been expecting from. I think the guy was Egyptian. And so like we had a good old chat about like the glory days of QPR, and it's this nice little escape. It's just what football is, right? It's an escape from the shitty grey nature of existence very often. So yeah, people in San Diego want to go down and help out. There's lots of help needed down there.
So I think you've also done some work on a podcast I enjoyed. Certainly the first season, the It Could Happen Here podcast.
That's it. Yep. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, of course. I'm terrible at plugging stuff. Yes. So It Could Happen Here is a podcast I work for on iHeartMedia. We try and look at collapse as an ongoing thing rather than the thing that we can only see in hindsight, right? So we're talking about how the world's falling apart and people are bringing it back together. So I covered the Marshall Islands and how they're responding to climate change and how they've sent a community in that. And I think they're very inspirational. I think there's a lot that we can learn from them. We covered the civil war in Myanmar. We went over there to meet young people who are 3D printing guns. Very different context of 3D printing guns in the US, but young people there who were, saw their friends. If you imagine that January 6th had stuck it out for 3 years and succeeded, and that those of us who didn't want January 6th.
Wait till November next year. It's
yeah. It could do. But they had a military coup, right? They didn't want a military coup. I met some of these lads on Reddit, of all places, where they were in a 3D printing subreddit. I like to 3D print stuff. And I pretty quickly worked out that they were actually 3D printing guns in the jungle. So I went over to visit them, did a podcast about that. So we've done a few different ones.
That's super cool.
Yeah. I would encourage people to listen to that just because it doesn't get reported on as much as it should. Not because I want to blow up my own work, but they're really inspiring, and I'm very proud of them as people, of the way they've progressed, of the way they've become very progressive people, not through thinking, not because they thought it was good to be progressive or beneficial to them, but because they've realized that like sexism hurts everyone, homophobia hurts everyone, and they've modified their views and accepted people and really become incredible young people. They're very young, and the time I spent with them, I really enjoyed, and yeah, I really think that the world should be paying more attention to them. There's a lot of terrible wars going on, but that's another one for you. They're doing quite well at the minute. They've just taken a ton of territory in northern Myanmar, so it's a good news story.
It's been just fantastic having you on. You've given us so much to think about. We're going to get those book recommendations and get it shared in the Discord if anybody is interested in reading about some of these histories that James has touched upon throughout this episode. Where can people find you?
I'm on X, formerly known as Twitter, at James Stout. I have a Patreon, which is James Stout. I write about stuff there, varied stuff. Sometimes I write about sports history. Sometimes I write about stuff we've been doing in Myanmar, migration, all kinds of stuff. I've written a book called The Popular Front in the 1936 Popular Olympics, which looks at how the Catalan Popular Front used sport to build an international anti-fascist identity that went on to become the International Brigades. The 400 people who founded the International Brigade, who were the first international volunteers, were actually there to compete in an anti-fascist Olympics, which was the alternative to the 1936 Berlin Olympics. So that book tells some of their stories. And they can find me on the It Could Happen Here podcast, which is 5 days a week. And you can get it wherever podcasts are given away for free.
Awesome. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on. This has been absolutely fantastic, and I could probably keep you for another hour, but I won't. So
yeah, no, it's nice. I like to talk about football. It's good.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for checking out the stream, and if you're listening on the podcasting app, make sure you check out the other show that's being released, where we talk about the survey results and some of what we're talking about for the future. So check those out. Until next week.